Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be tier ranking every single fantasy romance book I read in 2024. Alright guys, so as many of you know, I love fantasy romance. It is one of my favorite genres, and I read a ton of fantasy romances every year. So I've gotten to the habit of, at the end of every year, I will tier rank all of my fantasy romance reads, and I will give you a very brief, spoiler-free plot synopsis of every book, unless it's a sequel, and then I'll probably skip it. I don't want to get into spoilers, and then my overall thoughts. But with that being said, we are going to get right into it because I think there's a little over 60 fantasy romance books to talk about, and this is probably going to be a longer video. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's tier rank these fantasy romance books. Alright guys, so welcome to the tier rank. I am going to go over the different tiers, although they are pretty self-explanatory. So starting off, we have Perfection. I loved everything about this book. I will rave about this book and recommend this book to literally every single person I come in contact with. I just thoroughly loved this book. Then we have Love. I really enjoyed this book. It was probably a 4.5 or 5 star. Super amazing, just not quite like God tier level. And then we have Okay. I enjoyed this book while I was reading it. However, there was probably something about it that didn't make it really stand out. Either it wasn't super memorable, or for some reason, I just wouldn't put it in like Perfection or Love, but still, very solid read. Then we have Not For Me. There was some aspect of this book that didn't work for me, whether there was a trigger or also kind of forgettable. And I can see that other people would enjoy it. Personally, just not a book for me. And then we have Nope. There is nothing about this book that I enjoyed. So, with that being said, let's move on to the tier rank. So first up, we have Serpent and the Wings of Night. This is the first book in the Crown of Nyaxia duology. I actually recently reread this book in December, and I can definitely say it is in love. So if you're unfamiliar with the plot, just a quick summary. We are following Oria, who's a human girl that's adopted by the king of the vampires, and then when she grows up, she decides to fight in the Kajari, which is a tournament against other vampires to the death. So this book is really filled with action. We're just dropped into the Kajari, and Oria has to align herself with vampires from like enemy factions in order to survive, and it's just so good. So highly recommend putting it in love. With that being said, I will say I preferred Ashes and the Star-Cursed King just a little bit more, and really there was a huge difference in terms of pacing. I feel Ashes and the Star-Cursed King really focused on Oria and like an emotional journey. She's really coming and trying to find all of these different answers, and it had a very different like tone and pace. I also really loved the romance in the second book. I feel like it's much more at the forefront, and there is a saying that Rain, the main guy, who is now a top tier book boyfriend, says, "There she is." I am obsessed with that saying. I really need it on a shirt. I said that in a previous video. Like, it's my new good girl. I love "There she is." Oh my gosh, so good. Okay, so those are the first two. Then we have Blood of Hercules, also going in Perfection. I love this, and I was positive it was a YA romance, but it's actually a dark YA choose fantasy romance. We are following this girl named Alexis, and her world has been turned upside down because the Titans have come, Titans of like old Greece, and they are wreaking havoc, and the only people that are able to stop the Titans are the gods and the descendants of the gods, the Spartans. So Alexis is a foster child living a really rough life, and the only person she really cares about is her younger foster brother. So when she comes of age, she has to take a test, and this test determines that she actually has Spartan heritage. So she then has to go to a Spartan university, immediately fight to the death, in the hopes that if she survives, she will be granted a Spartan mentor who will hopefully teach her enough that she'll be able to survive certain trials and become a Spartan herself. And it goes from there. Why choose? Super dark, super spicy, really filled with dark humor, and I loved it. Then we have A Court This Cruel and Lovely. Unfortunately, this is going a Nope for me, only because, actually, that's a lie. It's going a Not for me, only because I do not remember the plot of this book at all. I do remember not loving it while I was reading it. It felt kind of tropey and reminiscent of a lot of other fantasy romance books I've read. Now, that being said, there are some other booktubers and content creators out there that I know this is their favorite fantasy romance of all time. So definitely, I would give it a try if you've heard the plot and it sounds interesting to you. It didn't work for me. Then we have A Fate Inked in Blood. This is a Norse-inspired fantasy romance by Danielle L. Jensen, the author of The Bridge Kingdom, and I really enjoyed this. I'm going to put it in love. This is following a woman that is designated as having some sort of goddess blood or is goddess blessed, and when this is revealed, all of these different Viking factions really want to use her for their own ends. And then there is a bit of a forbidden romance also going on. But the reason this is at love and not perfection is because there is quite a lull in pacing, or at least I thought so. The beginning of this immediately hooks you, and then there's a bit of a lull, and I was a little bit bored. But then it goes back up, and it's amazing again. So I am very much anticipating the sequel releasing later this year. Then we have A Ship of Bones and Teeth. I was waiting what felt like years for the audiobook to this to finally release, and it released this year. Very much worth the wait. It is a Little Mermaid reimagining, but with a dark twist. We're following the siren that begged a witch to give her legs so she could go on land and marry the beautiful Prince Eric. And the siren agrees. I believe the siren takes her tongue and possibly her soul. And then we kind of fast forward and we find out that our main character has married Prince Eric, but he is horribly abusive, and she instantly regrets her decision. So now she is on a boat with Prince Eric that ends up being taken over by pirates, and one of the pirates takes an interest in our main character, and it goes from there. So it is super dark, filled with other creatures that you wouldn't expect in a pirate romance. I don't want to give the twist away, but I really, really enjoyed it. And it's also, I'm pretty sure, a standalone, so you don't have to read a whole series. You can just read that book, which is kind of nice sometimes. All right, next up, we have Tempest of Tea. This is going to be the first nope, unfortunately. I had really high hopes for this book. I saw it was pitched as similar to Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, which is my favorite YA duology. And I really didn't feel that way. Although there is a heist towards the end of the book, I just wasn't as connected with these characters. And it's also pretty forgettable. I do remember the ending feeling like it came out of nowhere, not in a good way. So that is why it is a nope, unfortunately. Following up with The Legend of Thesmar. So we have Blood and Steel, which is the first book in the Legend of Thesmar series. I'm currently hosting a read-along along with my patrons for this series, and we are having such a good time. I'm loving this. It's kind of reminiscent of The Witcher and also kind of gives me Fourth Wing vibes. So it's following this girl named Althea, and she lives in a community where women are not allowed to wield weapons. However, she has always believed that she would grow up to become a warrior of legend, so she's been practicing in secret. And then she is discovered by another warrior who reluctantly kind of ends up training her in the hopes that she'll be able to pass these trials that would allow her dreams to come true. And I love this series. So both Blood and Steel and Vows in Ruin are going in love. And Slaying the Shadow Prince is a companion to the Legend of Thesmar series. You don't have to read the Legend of Thesmar to read Slaying the Shadow Prince. It can be read as a standalone. But if you are reading The Legend of Thesmar, I do highly recommend reading Slaying the Shadow Prince before you read book 3, because there's a lot of context and information that's given to you. I am going to put Slaying the Shadow Prince in love. I really enjoyed this. We are following this noble woman that after her family was killed by these monsters known as shadow wraiths, she is out for vengeance. And then someone very close to her also ends up being captured by these shadow wraiths. So she reluctantly has to agree to work with a warrior who happens to be half shadow wraith. And she absolutely detests him for the first half of this book. And it's very much an enemies to lovers romance with really good banter. And next up we have Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Now, I really debated if I wanted to include this in this fantasy romance tier rank, just because it is more Omegaverse than fantasy romance. However, I decided why not. So I'm putting this with okay. I know a lot of people did not love this. I had a really fun time with it. It's a vampire werewolf arranged marriage romance where the vampire has to marry the werewolf in order for their two people to live harmoniously. And it really goes from there. So I thought it was fun. I'm going to stick with okay. And this is where I might lose a few of you. All right, so we have Crescent City 2, Crescent City 3. I did not reread CC1 this year, or else that would be imperfection, but I did reread CC2, and that is going in Nope. I did not have a fun time at all with that book. I feel like that book reads very much like a textbook. And while I was reading it the first time, I think I rated it 4 stars, but that was only because of the ending. And if you know, you know, that ending was insane. But on my reread, I realized I did not enjoy reading that book. So that is going to be a Nope. And a lot of that also had to do with the fact that I was expecting a lot of the information that we get in CC2 to have a huge payoff for CC3. And I also found that was not the case. So I'm actually going to put CC3 in Not For Me, House of Flame and Shadow. I felt like there was quite a tone shift between the beginning of the book and the end of the book. It went very kind of like sci-fi. I also could care less about this romance. There is a romance in the series that I'm obsessed with, but it is not the main romance. I honestly could care less about the main characters, which is an issue if you're reading a series based on them, or focused around them. So while I love SJM, and I honestly think this series is probably still worth a read just because of book 1, it's definitely my least favorite series by SJM. Okay, next. Next we have Curse of the Thorn King by Lizette Marshall. This is a Beauty and the Beast reimagining. And honestly, it's underhyped. I feel like more people should be talking about it. I really enjoyed this. However, it has been a while since I read it, so I do forget some of the little intricacies. But we're following a thief who I can't remember if she's blackmailed or she just decides to break into this Fae house that has been cursed in order to kill him. I'm pretty sure she's supposed to assassinate him. However, when she gets in there, she realizes that because of the curse, she can't leave. So she is stuck there with him. And like I said, Beauty and the Beast reimagining, so you kind of figure out what happens from there. But it was really solid read, and it's pretty short, so easily read in one sitting. I love Lizette Marshall. A Court of Blood and Bindings is one of my favorite fantasy romance series, so definitely recommend. All right, next up we have Embers in the Snow. This is also going to go in okay, mostly because it was fine. Like, I didn't have any strong feelings for or against it. It's very much like a small town kind of fantasy romance, which I know sounds kind of weird. But we're following this girl that ends up in an arranged marriage to a vampire. And once she gets there and meets him, they're trying to make their marriage work, but there's all of this outside negativity and like threats and things that are really making it impossible. So they're just trying to live a newly married life, and yeah. So I'm gonna put that with okay. Definitely worth picking up, but I probably will never reread it. All right, next up we have Fear the Flames. Immediately going to Obsessed or Perfection. I loved this. It was recently transferred from indie pub to traditional pub, and I know they took out a lot, but overall the story was just really fun. We're following this girl, or princess, and when she was born, there was a prophecy that if a princess was born and bonded with dragons, that it could spell doom for the kingdom. And her father, the king, took that prophecy very seriously and immediately locks up his young princess daughter, who is able to eventually escape, but she has to leave her dragons behind. So this first book, Fear the Flames, is very much just a, not really heist, but kind of her trying to get her dragons back from her father along with some companions. And the romance in this was chef's kiss. And it's definitely spicier than I feel like I thought going in. The romance is really, really good. And I love the main guy in this. All right, next up we have Feathers So Vicious, a dark fantasy romance. This is going to go in okay, mostly because I have not read the second book, so I don't really know where the story is going. But this is following I'm pretty sure she's either human or fae. I cannot remember. But she is living in this society where there are bad fae/humans that are able to turn into ravens. So if you're a raven, you're kind of like the bad guy. And the only way to determine if you're a raven or like a normal human fae is torture, which does happen in the beginning of the story. And it's kind of described in detail. So check trigger warnings. But our main character ends up being captured by 2 ravens. One of them is a complete psychopath. The other one is a golden retriever, except in the bedroom where he's slightly terrifying. And I had a really good time with this book. I'm not sure if it's wide shoes. I think we find that out in the second book, which I have not read, but that probably will end up changing my rating. Yeah. Then we have Flames of Chaos. I have no idea where this is going to go. So I will describe the plot to you while I think about it. Flames of Chaos. Honestly, I probably would have DNF'd this book if it wasn't a Patreon book club book. So I had to finish it. But it's following this girl that has a bunch of sisters who are all witches. She's a witch herself, and her twin sister ends up going missing. So while trying to find her sister in like a different realm, she ends up meeting Nox, who is a warlock and immediately wants Amelia and her sisters to vacate the area. He also makes it clear that while he hates her and like detests her as a witch, he would love to sleep with her, and that's like made so apparent so many times. So the writing in this is very, very crude, which I wasn't a fan of. However, the second half of the book got really, really good, so I'm really torn. And I do plan on continuing with the series because I want to know what happens. Like, I really did like where the story ended up going. So I actually think I'm gonna, it's between love and okay. I do think I'm gonna put it with love, and I never in a million years would have thought I would say that while I was reading it. But I want to know what's gonna happen, and honestly, it's like between these two tiers. I just don't have a tier for that. But yeah, so if that sounds interesting, definitely pick it up. Just know the writing, very, very, very crude. It's a lot. All right, next up we have Fourth Wing. I'm going to put Fourth Wing in perfection. I know it is not everybody's favorite, and it is a tad overhyped. However, it is just a really fun fantasy romance. It's really easy to get into. If you're unfamiliar, it's following Violet Sorrengail, who believes her entire life when she grows up she's going to become a scribe, and then her mother tells her that she's actually going to have to attend Dragon Rider University in the hope she can survive long enough to find a dragon, learn how to ride said dragon, gain magical abilities, and defend her people. And it's just a good story. I really enjoyed it. I also really enjoyed Iron Flame and cannot wait for Onyx Storm to release in 17 days. But who is counting? At the time I am filming this video. All right, so next up we have Guild, which is the first book in the Plated Prisoner series. Now, I will say, had this been any book other than the first book, it would probably be in perfection. However, I DNF'd the first book 4 times. So this was actually a reread, and I did have a good time with it. If you're unfamiliar, we're following Auren, who has been gold touched by Midas and is considered Midas's gilded pet. So she stays in Midas's castle, under lock and key, and all she cares about is pleasing Midas and being safe. And all of that changes when she is forced to leave her gilded cage. And I DNF'd the first book because the main character is so subservient, and it's almost frustrating. But the beauty of this series is as it progresses, you really get to see the main character grow as an individual. So overall, I ended up loving the series. But the first book, still a little bit hard for me to get through. All right, I'm going to move this up. Next up, we have Spark of the Everflame, which is the first book in the Kindred Curse saga. This is going to go in love. So this is following Diem, and Diem lives in a world that is ruled by the Descended because they are descended from gods, and they are very cruel to the humans. So when Diem's mother ends up going missing, Diem has to decide if she wants to accept the help of a descended kind of like heir who she believes can help find her mother, or if she wants to align herself with her boyfriend and the rebel group that is starting up against the Descended. And I did love, oops, I moved the wrong one. I did love Spark of the Everflame. I will say, though, similar to A Fate Inked in Blood, there is a bit of a lull in pacing. So I will put that in love. I am going to move Glow of the Everflame, the second book, up to perfection. It's perfect. I absolutely loved it. The slow burn romance in it is amazing, and I can't really get into it without spoilers, but the ending really caught me off guard. So I really, really enjoyed it. And next up, we have Heart of Fire. I actually read this as part of a reading vlog I did with my friend Becky over at Bex Reads. If you're not following Becky, definitely check her channel out. The funny thing about me and Becky is we read very similar books and have polar opposite tastes when it comes to those books. We always end up rating books completely opposite, which is one of the best parts of our friendship, I feel like. So I am going to put this in okay. I actually did rate this fairly high. I think I gave this 4 stars. The only issue is I do forget a lot of the plot of this, other than we're following a dragon shifter who, after this woman either is like forced to go into his cave or like wanders into his cave, he becomes very interested in, and she doesn't realize that he can shift into a human. So he then turns into his human form and kind of like befriends her as a human, and it's like their romance. So it was cute. I just probably won't continue with the series, which is why it's in okay. All right, next up we have A Heart of Night and Fire. Unfortunately, I am going to put this in Not For Me, only because I, once again, don't remember very much of this. However, I actually had a live show where I discussed this book only a few days after finishing it, and I still had some issues with certain plot points and things not really feeling as fleshed out as I was expecting. So I think it's a mix of both of those. I read it at like not a great time. And also, I didn't fully understand some of the plot. So that is going in Not For Me. But I am open to reading more from this author. I know she has a pretty decent backlist. And I've heard really good things. All right, next up we have Heartless Hunter, which is a YA witch and witch hunter fantasy romance. I'm going to put this with okay, mostly because of the magic system. So in this story, we're following a girl that's a witch. And in this society, if you're found out as being a witch, you're immediately killed. So she is kind of pretending to be like a noble woman by day, and at night she's a vigilante witch. And she believes that people are starting to suspect her of being a witch, so she decides to fake date the head witch hunter. Now the issue is the head witch hunter is already suspecting her. So they both agree to date, and then they're both trying to kind of like figure out what is going on with one another, like secretly. And the magic system in this is really based off of menstrual blood, because the way it works is the witches need blood in order to cast spells, but you can't cut yourself without people noticing, so they have to rely on menstrual blood, and I just have a lot of questions about that. But overall, it was okay. I probably won't continue. Next up, we have House of Bane and Blood. This is also going to go in love. I really thought the whole vibe of this was really cool. Kind of gives steampunk / Peaky Blinders. We're following this girl that wants to save her family's crumbling syndicate, and she agrees to a marriage. However, the night before, she had met a very mysterious guy. They had a bit of a fling, and somehow she ends up married to him through some interesting circumstances, and then she needs to help him, and it's their story. So I really want to go back and read the second book, but overall, I really enjoyed it. And next up, we have How Does It Feel? I love this. I'm definitely putting this in love. It is kind of unhinged, but in the best way. We're following this girl that when she was very young, she saw what she believed to be a fae, and ever since then, she's become obsessed with creatures with wings. So when she grows up, she starts learning or researching a endangered moth. And while searching for said moth, she accidentally ends up in the Unseelie Court, where she is immediately almost killed so many times. There's a certain tree monster in this that is horrifying and lives in my brain rent-free. Like, it was such a weird read, but still, I really enjoyed it. Now, the sequel I'm going to put in okay. While I was enjoying the sequel, there is a trope that is added that is not my favorite, and I feel like if you like the first book, it really kind of changes in the second book, the whole dynamics. It's very hard to do this without spoilers. We're also changing location. I really enjoyed the Unseelie Court, and the new location we go to in this one, I didn't love quite as much, but still really enjoyed it and excited to read the sequel. And next up, we have Nectar of the Wicked by Ella Fields. This is going in perfection. I love every single book I've read by Ella Fields. She is one of my favorite fantasy romance authors. Her books are a little bit darker, but just beautifully written. In this, we are following a changeling fae who is raised by a human guardian. When her guardian ends up passing away, the fae is now left with really nowhere to turn to. She has no idea who she is, where she comes from, even her name. So she is desperately seeking answers, and that is when a mysterious and wicked fae shows up and says, hey, I have the answers that you are searching for. If you agree to marry me and move to the fae realm, I will help you out. And it's their romance, and the main guy is completely unhinged, and I loved it. I also will say Wrath of the Damned, which is the sequel, also in perfection. It's a little bit darker, and there's a lot more like political maneuvering, but it was so good. And Peaches and Honey. We have a lot of really good books in a row. Peaches and Honey, this is very reminiscent of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. We're following this girl that because of her vitiligo, she's been completely isolated from society. And one day while passing a stranger, she offers the stranger compassion, and the stranger rewards her by giving her a peach. And when she takes a bite of the peach, she finds out she is now immortal. So really this entire book is watching our main character discover like the nuances of humanity. She sees so much turmoil, but also some of the like beautiful moments, and it's just so well written. It's very lyrical, and I love the romance. I will say I prefer this book over The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and cannot wait for the second book to release via audio. All right, next up we have Phantasma. This is very similar to Caraval by Stephanie Garber, but a darker, spicier, and I actually preferred it better. So this is following a girl that when her mother passes away, she inherits her mother's necromancy abilities. And soon after, she finds out that her house is about to go into foreclosure. So her sister takes it upon herself to enter Phantasma, which is a deadly competition where the winner will receive a wish from, I believe, the devil. And our main character ends up entering in order to save her sister. Now, like I said, she is a necromancer, so she does have a bit of a romance with a certain ghost. And I loved it. I thought it was really unique, really good. Definitely going in love. And next up, we have Quicksilver. Immediate obsession. This is worth all of the hype. We are following a girl that is living as a thief, and one day she is caught and almost killed, and as she is bleeding out, a fae shows up through a mysterious portal, takes her back to the fae realm where he heals her and tells her she is actually an alchemist and one of the only humans able to manipulate a certain magical compound that could save his people, and he ends up bonding himself to her so she isn't able to escape. And on top of that, he is pretty cruel to her in the beginning. There's amazing banter, a really good animal, really cute animal companion, and overall, I just really love this. Almost as much as I loved Reign of Shadows and Endings, which was one of my top reads of 2024, along with the sequel and also the third book. I realized as I'm doing this, I'm missing an entire row of books, so I don't know what got messed up. But this is my fourth time trying to film this tier rank, so we're just gonna leave it as it is. But next up we have Reign of Shadows and Endings, which is the first book in the Legacy series, which it's one of the best series I've ever read. I have not felt butterflies from a series since reading A Court of Thorns and Roses, so if you have not read Reign of Shadows and Endings, highly recommend. We are following Tessa, and in Tessa's world, the gods have given power to the Legacy, which are their children, and the Legacy rule over the Fae. And Tessa is a Fae. So she knows when she comes of age, she is going to be forced to live in one of these 6 Legacy houses and forced to perform work at one of the houses. So she is very surprised to discover that she is actually selected to become the primal source to the heir of endings. Now, this is a very scary position because it's almost like a forced mate bond. She is going to have tattoos placed on her that will allow the heir of endings to sense when she is near, feel her emotions, and she is even going to become physically and emotionally attracted to him. So the entire first book is really her trying to get out of this. It does play around with the captor-captive trope, so definitely check trigger warnings. And then it really goes from there, but it has dragon shifters, vampires, so much action, it has everything. I love it. So definitely one of my favorite reads. And next up, we have Shadowkissed. This is a new adult vampire fantasy romance. It was another book that Becky from Bex Reads recommended I read, and I loved this one. So it was not at all what I was expecting. We're following this girl that I believe she's either a witch or a sorcerer. And at the very beginning, she is captured and taken to this vampire underworld nest type thing. And when she gets there, another vampire ends up kind of taking her under his wing. And she is trying to find her mother and discover the secrets of her past. And it's obviously a very dangerous environment. But I will definitely be continuing with the series. All right, and next up we have Slaying the Vampire Conqueror by Carissa Brabant. I thoroughly love this book. So also, Going in Love, this is following a woman that when she was younger, she was orphaned, so she ended up joining a cult in order to survive. And in this cult, she was forced to give up her eyes, but she received the ability to see the threads of fate, which is how she kind of navigates the world. I just thought that was such a unique premise. So anyway, one of the people high up in the cult end up tasking her with going to a vampire conqueror, becoming his seer, and then assassinating him. So that is the most of the beginning of the book, and then it really kind of goes from there, but I really enjoyed this. All right, next up, we have Stolen by Wolves. This is a Why Choose fantasy romance. I will say the very beginning is not Why Choose, or at least the first book, but I believe as you progress, it does become Why Choose. But if you've seen The Last Kingdom on Netflix, and if you haven't, you should. It's one of my favorite shows. We are following this girl. It's set in the same kind of time frame, But we are following this girl that lives in Britannia, and she's part of this very pious community. And they end up letting in Vikings in hopes of these Vikings becoming allies and helping protect them against kind of other evil outside forces, not realizing that these Vikings have some ulterior motives and immediately kind of attack this area and capture our main character. And there's also a whole Omegaverse aspect, so they're kind of shifters, and it was just really, really good. I definitely have to do a reread before I continue with the series, but I'm hoping to do that in 2025. Okay, so next up, we have The Ever King by L.J. Andrews. I believe this is a companion duology to A Curse of Thorns and Shadows, another series by the author. Now, this is following Eric, and Eric has been cursed and forced to live in the Ever, and all he wants is to get revenge on the person that forced him there. And everything really comes to a head when the person that forced him there's daughter ends up releasing Eric from his watery prison, and he decides to use the daughter to get revenge on the father. And if you have read the Shatter Me series, Eric is literally Aaron Warner, but a pirate version, so top tier boyfriend. I definitely need to read the second book in this series. I've heard really good things, but I just feel like my TBR is kind of out of control. This is also going in love. All right, so getting down to the last few books. Next up, we have The Last Lost Girl by Casey L. Bond. This is a Peter Pan reimagining, and I feel like more people should talk about this book. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. I'm going to put this with love. So I picked this up on a whim at a Polycon after meeting the author, and this was really good. So we're following this young girl that when she was young, she was found by a slightly older girl named Belle, who really took care of her. So these two grew up almost as sisters, living on the streets but taking care of each other. And then Belle starts to lose her mind a little bit, becomes obsessed with Neverland, and starts talking about Peter Pan and Hook. And then one day tells our main character, I am sorry, I have to leave you, go back to Neverland. So they end up both going back, but immediately become separated. And then a man with a hook ends up finding our main character and capturing her. So I love that this really plays around with the amnesia trope. When you get to Neverland, your memories start to change. So you really start to question what is real and what is not. And I just really love an unreliable narrator. And this entire book is filled with them. So I believe the sequel is releasing later in 2025. I cannot wait. Really hoping the audiobook drops with the physical book. Okay, and next up we have The North Wind. This is very much a me issue, so I'm putting it in not for me. The premise was really interesting though. We're following this girl that lives in a community where every few years or so a god named the North Wind comes and takes one of the prettiest girls that he selects from the community, and they are never seen or heard from again. So our main character's sister is actually selected to be taken, but because they're twins, our main character goes in her stead, and then soon discovers that the North Wind does not kill these women, he actually marries them. And then it really goes from there, but I didn't realize this book included alcoholism, and I don't love reading about alcoholism or anyone really grappling with that in fantasy romance. For some reason, I'm more okay in dark romance, but I didn't know this book featured that, and it's one of my triggers, so had I known, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. But I will say the writing, characters, and premise were all really good, so definitely recommend. Okay, I'm starting to lose my voice. Like I said, I've tried doing this 4 times, and the batteries of one of my devices kept dying, so I started this at 7:30, it's now 10:15. All right, so next up we have The Veiled Kingdom by Holly Renee. Ooh, this is tough. I think I'm going to put this with okay. I will say I did prefer this over her other series, while I still had some issues with The Veiled Kingdom. So in the story, we're following the princess of this kingdom, and her father's a very tyrannical ruler. So she ends up fleeing and ends up immediately being captured by a rebel group that give her the ultimatum, either you work with us or we kill you. Mind you, they have no idea who she actually is. So she reluctantly agrees, and then the eldest son of the rebel group's leader, named Dacre, ends up taking an interest in her. But my biggest issue with this book is Dacre the entire time really is questioning our main character's motivations and being like, why are you here? Why are you part of this rebellion? Like, you shouldn't be here. And he is the sole reason she is there. He is the person that captured her and took her to this rebel group. So I just didn't understand why he just kept questioning her loyalties when, honestly, he gave her an ultimatum. I don't think she had very many loyalties. But yeah, so that was my issue. I've also heard kind of mixed things about the second book in the series. So if you've read it, let me know. Is it worth continuing? Because I am curious to see what happens. Okay, next up we have The Wren in the Holly Library. So this ended up being a surprise 5-star. I really ended up enjoying this, and I thought it was going to be more, I think it's because it's urban fantasy, and I'm not a huge fan of urban, but I did really, really enjoy it. So in the story, we are following this girl, and monsters have kind of come up into the world. So humans and monsters are living together, not very well together, but they are both cohabitating. And our main character is a thief who decides that she is going to rob a monster. And when she gets there, she is captured immediately. And the monster also gives her an ultimatum and says, hey, I can either kill you or you can help me steal an object from another monster. So she agrees, and then it's their romance. It also is filled with like Celtic mythology, and I just was not expecting it to be as good as it was. Now, I will say it is pitched as a Beauty and the Beast reimagining. I do not think that is the case. There's very, very few ties to Beauty and the Beast, but other than that, really solid read. Okay, final 3. Next up we have Thief of Silver and Souls. This is a Why Choose fantasy romance. We are following this girl that after she accidentally kills her younger sister using her magic, she becomes very fearful of her magic. I'm also pretty sure, I read this exactly a year ago, that if it is found that she possesses magic, she will be killed in this society. So she's been living as a recluse, and one day she stumbles upon a woman that is dying, and while trying to save her, she accidentally steals her soul, and it becomes part of her body. So now this noble woman's soul is inhabiting our main character's body. And this woman tells her that, hey, before all this happened, I was planning on trying to take down this plot that was going on in a university. And now because I am stuck in you, we have to do it together. So that is really where the story gets going. And like I said, it is Why Choose, but this is another one I feel like is pretty good if you're kind of new to Why Choose, because the fantasy and the mystery are really at the forefront. I don't remember it being super spicy or anything like that. So I'm going to put this with okay. All right, and next up, Under the Oak Tree. I honestly debated if I wanted to include it in this list because I'm honestly not sure if this is fantasy romance or not. We're following this girl named Maxine, and her father is a general, and she's kind of like an outcast in her family. So she is very surprised when her father tells her that she is going to marry a soldier, and she ends up married to the soldier, and the wedding night is very, very awkward, doesn't go as planned, and then he ends up going away for 3 years. And while he's gone, he becomes a decorated officer that everyone becomes obsessed with. So she very much believes that when he returns, he is going to divorce her. Instead, he says, hey, you are my wife, why are you not living in my castle? And it's just their romance, and it's very, very cute. It's just these two people trying to get to know each other, and I thought it was adorable. So I am putting this in love. All right, and last up, we have When the Moon Hatched. You guys already know it's going in perfection. Now, I will say, I do a terrible job of trying to summarize the plot of this book. There's so much going on. And I will also say the writing is a little bit hard to understand in the beginning. I did listen to the audiobook and follow along physically the first time I read this. But other than that, I just feel like the writing is very much like a puzzle you have to solve. You never really know what's going on in a good way. So I really enjoy Sarah A. Parker. I've read a few other books by her, and I think I've given them all like 4 or 5 stars. But in the story, we are following this girl who is part of a rebellion group, and she's going off to assassinate a certain person. And while doing so, she ends up being captured and held in this prison. Now, simultaneously, there is a prince named Khan who is collecting fallen dragon shards that have fallen from the sky. And while doing so, it ends up bringing him to a prison where he finds our main character, and the two of them go off on an adventure together. And there is so much more to it than that, but that is the best I can do without giving away any spoilers. But overall, it is an amazing read, and once again, the sequel is releasing later this year. Alright guys, that is it for my fantasy romance tier rank. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know down in the comments below what was your favorite fantasy romance of 2024. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Leslie, Kat, Lotta, and Jess. Thank you so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!